Welcome and thanks for joining us. My next guest today is Robert Sheldon. He's the Senior Director for Public Policy and Strategy at CrowdStrike. Robert, good to have you with us.
Great to be back, Tom.
All right, and on the panel, we talked a lot about the threat landscape, and CrowdStrike kind of is one of the go-to sources of information about the threat landscape. Tell us how you go about finding that information. What are we seeing? What are the trends today?
So we have a great deal of insight about changes in the threat landscape, in part because we have an enormous sensor network. Essentially, all of the customers that we have, we're able to get security relevant telemetry that protects their privacy, but nevertheless informs us about changes that we see in terms of prevalence of different threats, and that allows us to understand different targeting trends as they change over time. So we have information based on that. We also have a great deal of information based on open source research that we're able to do through a collaboration that we have with others in the industry and government entities. And then we have people who are really carefully assessing developments in geopolitical changes so that we understand things like changes in military doctrine or how intelligence services operate. So where that's relevant for cybersecurity threats, we have a good understanding of that as well.
Yeah, that's really a good point. The idea of looking at the geopolitical landscape kind of as a precursor to what we're going to see downstream, and that gets you and customer organizations out of the reactive mode to some degree.
That's right. So many of the threats that we see are essentially financially motivated, or what we call e-crime, but there are a great deal of nation-state associated threats, and the activity that we see from them is absolutely downstream of national policy. So when there's a new strategy released or a new requirement essentially articulated by a national government or a military organization, we see that translate very rapidly into threat activity. And that might mean that some sector that wasn't previously targeted becomes heavily targeted very quickly.
Right, so yeah, interesting. So organizations, especially government agencies, probably have to stay on top of this stuff as a matter of survival.
Indeed, yeah. Government agencies are always very high on the list. They have a very, very severe threat environment, but where there are agencies like CISA, for example, that need to do outreach and sort of community collaboration and coordination, their understanding of this sort of change kind of helps them do outreach to new organizations that might not have been in an organization that does share information previously. So they may need to say, well, we better do an outreach to that sector or that subsector to make sure that we have helped them understand that they are about to get hit if they're not being hit already.
Sure, and what are we seeing specifically in the threat landscape, especially as it relates to the emergence of different types of artificial intelligence?
Sure, so from a sector standpoint, we see really, again, heavy targeting from the federal or on government organizations. That's not just federal, that's also state and local, domestically, and then a lot of international governments. All the key sectors that we've talked about in previous years, especially in critical infrastructure, are getting targeted. I would say that the telecommunications sector is particularly heavily targeted at this point, and then entities that are related to AI. So cloud service providers, chip designers or manufacturers, research labs that are doing work on AI, and the like. So those are the different sectors that need to be on the lookout. From a TTP standpoint, we are seeing a lot of threat actors go malwareless. Our most recent report, which just came out this week, that characterized threat activity from the first half of 2025, saw that 81% of attacks are now malware-free, essentially where there's interactive intrusions. That means that there is actually someone, an adversary, behind the keyboard, and they are not using malware. They're using tools that exist on the network already, which we call living off the land in the industry, to be able to complicate defenders' ability to detect that and stop that. So it looks like if you're in a security team or if you're in an IT team, you might see some activity. It looks normal because it's a tool that exists on the network, but threat actors are using it to effectuate their own aims. So that's something that we need to be highly attuned to.
Well, how do they get it in there?
Well, in some instances, they're using tools that are already there. They might be using PowerShell or something like that administrators use, or remote managing and monitoring tools. And it's there for a legitimate purpose, but if a threat actor is able to, for example, compromise an identity, get into the network, rather than pulling in malware, which we as defenders used to be able to look at and say like, well, that's malicious software, we'll block that, remediate the problem, we don't have that opportunity anymore. So we need to be really highly attuned to these identity-based attacks, and then to be able to be attuned to instances where it might be a legitimate tool or capability that exists on that endpoint or on that enterprise natively, and it's just being used in a way which seems suspicious. And how do we know it seems suspicious? It's because we're looking at many different organizations, how these sorts of tools are being used normally, how the organization has previously used those tools, and if it seems like it's doing something that it shouldn't, we're able to initiate a detection. Organizations can stop based on that.
All right, so given that methodology, 81% of the attacks, that's most of them. What's their motivation? Is it simply stealing data, which I can see for a government agency would be a great motivation, or is it disruption?
Sure. So,
or all of the above?
We're tracking at this point over 250 different threat actors, and they are all motivated by subtly different things. There's a great deal that are essentially in the e-crime ecosystem, and they're trying to monetize their attacks, and they'll do that any number of different ways. But as I mentioned before, there's a great deal of
money too. I forgot about that one.
Indeed, yeah. A great motivator for a lot of the threats that we see. But also nation-state threat actors that have essentially national aims. So if there's a national priority or national interest, a perceived national interest, they'll pursue that in different ways. That includes attacking government organizations and industry organizations, even things like nonprofits or educational institutions. So everybody has to be alert for that. We also see hacktivist threats, where it's people that have a social or a political aim that they're trying to effectuate through breaching an organization or hacking them. That might be in order to disrupt them, or it might be to leak their information and distort it, that type of thing. So really the threats are very complex.
Right, so there are as many motivations as there are attackers out there, basically,
Yep.
or there could be multiple motivations. We want this data, but while we're at it, we'll scoop out some money or something.
Oftentimes we see exactly that.
Wow. Well, then, given that kind of effect, then what should agencies be doing? I mean, what's your advice to client agencies on how to stay, nimble in this environment?
Sure. So for the federal government specifically, I think there's been a great deal of progress over the past number of years. It wasn't too long ago that I think a gap had emerged from where the U.S. federal government was and where industry was in terms of having modern defensive tools in place. But in Executive Order 14028 from 2021, we started to see the mandate for having endpoint detection and response, for example, which increasingly is the backbone for security programs in industry. We saw those being brought into government, and that really did help catch agencies up to where their counterparts, in a sense, in industry were at. So that was a hugely beneficial thing. And now it's really just making sure that they have tools and practices where they are securing identities and where they're getting telemetry from other parts of the network. So not just the classic endpoints, but also esoteric endpoints if they have cloud environments, like ephemeral cloud environments or IoT environments or critical infrastructure, sort of relevant ICS or OT environments that they're able to get telemetry from there. Also from SaaS applications, from cloud service providers, and being able to pull all that telemetry together and to be able to hunt on that and then to be able to take actions for prevention and remediation on that sort of data from this widely now extended federal enterprise. A lot of different agencies have that. You can think about agencies like the Census Bureau that have a bunch of esoteric endpoints for trackers. You can think about a number of different agencies that have sort of critical infrastructure in their environment somewhere. So agencies need to be really attentive to that.
And can agencies use artificial intelligence themselves in accelerating their own responsiveness?
Sure. So we talked briefly before about threat actors using artificial intelligence, but really the security community has been using artificial intelligence for a long period of time, over a decade from the standpoint of using ML or machine learning for prevention purposes. At least that's what we at CrowdStrike have been doing. And increasingly, these security tools are being able to use generative AI to be able to do a number of things. So one is being able to take essentially jobs that were really challenging, needed a lot of specific training. In some instances, people needed to learn really specific query languages to be able to ask questions in a sense of their data. They're able to really use natural language and generative AI models to be able to make a task like that, which might have taken all day in a previous time, and really rapidly within minutes get a report about what happened in a specific incident or about the prevalence of a particular vulnerability or that type of thing, which is kind of a standard fare task or requirement for someone who's working in a security operations center today. And then there's increasingly the ability from the security industry standpoint, like we at CrowdStrike have agentic AI, where we're able to get people to, really essentially empower their own teams, save a great deal of time by kind of queuing these agentic models to be able to take actions on their own behalf. And that is going to accelerate over time And that's going to be helpful in terms of helping to make sure that defenders can keep pace with the really rapidly accelerating threat environment that we talked about a moment ago.
Well, give us an example of where an agentic AI function
Sure.
might operate in service of cybersecurity.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think in many instances, if you talk to someone who is a SOC analyst, they would say that there are a number of different moments in their day or in their week where they're doing something that's quite similar. They've seen the first phase of what might become a breach, like there's been a compromised account or a compromised credential of some kind, or maybe even there's a threat actor that's observed on an endpoint, and they take a step to isolate that host, remediate it, produce a report about it, be able to brief that up to management, be able to assess whether the vector threat actor used to get access to that resource is closed off, or whether there's other versions of that elsewhere in the enterprise. I mean, this is the sort of bread and butter work of a SOC analyst today. And increasingly, you'll see organizations be able to essentially task agents to do different aspects of that sequence of events, being able to do the identification, isolation, remediation, reporting, and then maybe scanning or understanding the posture of other parts of the network to make sure that that same sort of attack can't happen again. And over time, a lot of that will be done by agentic AI for I think people who choose to adopt that capability. And that doesn't mean that the SOC analysts, unfortunately, will be able to go on vacation. I think that there's a lot of instances where people are kind of doing sort of like broader risk mitigation tasks, or doing risk management or security maturity and compliance tasks. And a lot of times the people that are now working on some of that tactical stuff are going to be able to up-level how they spend their day and their cycles, and that will help over time give organizations a stronger security posture overall, which will be nice to see.
So it sounds like this is not one of those opportunities where AI can replace people and generate what they used to generate, but you really need to do different things with the people you have and get better at what they used to do with AI.
I think if you're in leadership in an enterprise, whether that's just leading the enterprise itself or whether it's leadership of a security team, you have a lot of different knobs and levers that you can that you can actuate. And I think some will say we choose to try and have a smaller workforce and just do the same thing. But I think the vast majority of people will say we felt like we were far behind before. We need to be more proactive. We need to get on top of things. So instead of just replacing, we're going to have people use these tools to augment what we can do, and then we can up-level our people who have organizational context. They're in the seat in an organization. They understand what the business process is. They understand what the specific requirements are, and we're going to have them focus on those sorts of things, and then hopefully be able to do things like more proactively increase security maturity. So working on sort of special projects and that sort of thing, while some of this agentic AI, if they've been able to integrate that in the enterprise, able to do some of the more tactical things in the background.
Right, so then it sounds too then as if the responsibility for security is becoming more diffuse throughout the organization and not just the SOC, for example, or whatever, the development department.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think everybody in the organization plays a huge role. In particular, where there are business applications that are integrating AI, it's useful to consult with the security team. We mentioned earlier the advent of AI sort of infused insider threats. So making sure that security is partnering with HR, and then obviously in finance, where there are the potential for financially motivated crimes, to get people to transfer money or do wire transfers, these sorts of things, making sure that security teams integrated with that function. So really, security needs to be touching all the different parts of the organization. That's true in the federal government as well as in the commercial space.
Yeah, so to develop that security model of where you might be vulnerable and what attackers might want from your particular organization, you would need all that input to be able to develop that risk model.
Yeah, absolutely right.
All right, anything else people need to know about CrowdStrike or about AI in cyber?
We just released a report last week, our threat hunting report, which we produce annually. It covers data from the past 6 months, and we can compare that to data over the previous year. There's some really sobering statistics in there. I recommend everybody check it out.
All right, so download it, but if it comes in from a text, maybe download it yourself by going right to your website.
Yeah, if you go to the CrowdStrike website, that's probably the best way.
All right, sounds great. Robert Sheldon is the Senior Director for Public Policy and Strategy at CrowdStrike. Good to have you with us.
Thank you again.
I'm Tom Temin. You've been watching the series Accelerate Together, Secure by AI. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Accelerate Together.